March 3rd, 1945. A drizzly morning draped the outskirts of Mainz, Germany, in a grey, soggy haze. Mud clung stubbornly to the cracked soles of worn boots, each step sucking a woman's weight down, as if the earth itself resisted their passage. Liesel Bauer, 28, pressed her shivering daughter Johanna, 4, to her chest, feeling the small body tremble against the thin fabric of her coat. Her scarf, frayed and damp, scraped against her jaw as she bent forward under the weight of hunger and fear. The smell of wet earth mixed with distant smoke, a bitter perfume that clung to the nostrils and throat, reminding the line of women of both the devastation behind them and the uncertainty ahead. The group shuffled forward in silence, voices muffled under rain-soaked scarves and the pounding of anxious hearts. Soldiers' boots clattered on the slick cobblestones, and somewhere beyond the broken walls of Mainz, the faint rumble of artillery reminded them that the war's shadow stretched far. Rumors of American soldiers circulated in whispered conversations, stories of kindness and cruelty, of mercy and harsh discipline, each rumor sharpening the tension in the air. The women clutched at whatever talismans they had, locket chains, prayer books, scraps of cloth. Liesel held tightly to a linen apron, folded small beneath her coat, the gift of her mother. Its fabric, worn yet fragrant, pressed reassurance against her fingers whenever she dared touch it. A soldier's sharp voice broke the rhythm. "Lift your dress!" The line froze, rigid with dread. Small hands gripped the apron, small feet shifted nervously in mud-caked shoes. Liesel felt Johanna's fingers tighten around hers, trembling in fearful synchronization. The air seemed to thicken with possibility. What would come next? Eyes darted to the American soldier nearby, waiting, tense, but he looked away, deliberate in his refusal to intrude. Relief surged like a weak current through the women, mingled with disbelief and shame. The apron, now damp with rain and anxious palms, absorbed the tension, the small relief, the quiet testament of human restraint. It became a witness to fear, a vessel of courage, a marker of choice. One small decision, an averted gaze, had shifted the energy of the entire line, leaving them trembling yet intact. Liesel knew the story was far from over. The day stretched ahead, uncertain, each step a negotiation with danger, with hope. She adjusted the apron around Johanna again, and the two moved forward, mud squelching beneath their shoes, carrying the fragile weight of survival. March 3rd, 1945, late morning. The women were shepherded into a makeshift shelter, its walls heavy with the scent of damp straw, unwashed wool, and faint smoke from nearby fires. Wooden beams sagged under moisture, the floor uneven, littered with puddles that mirrored the grey light seeping through gaps in the walls. Liesel sank to the cold, uneven floor, Johanna pressing against her shoulder, her small fingers curling around the corner of the linen apron, now resting in Liesel's lap. The apron, stiffened by rain and trembling hands, felt heavier now, carrying the weight of anticipation, fear, and tiny fragments of hope. The Americans moved quietly among them. One soldier, tall and young, passed a tin cup of water to Liesel, his hands steady, eyes fleetingly meeting hers before dropping away. Her throat felt parched, mouth dry, and the first sip brought only partial relief. Around her, women whispered, some softly sobbing, others pressing fists to their chests to still the shaking of fear. Each reaction was a mirror of their inner torment. The apron absorbed all of it, the murmurs, the wet hair plastered to foreheads, the small acts of human decency. Liesel pressed it to her chest, feeling the coarse fabric against her skin, imagining it as a shield against uncertainty. Hours stretched like a taut wire, knees ached, back stiffened, but the simple presence of the apron offered an anchor, a thread tying her to her daughter and to a fragment of normalcy. Tiny gestures punctuated the quiet, a hand resting briefly on an arm, a shared glance that said, without words, "We are still here, we endure." Liesel noticed a young cook, Hans, who had been assigned to distribute meals, paused to adjust a pot lid with care, as if even the smallest task could restore some balance to the world outside and within. She took a piece of bread from him later, breaking it over the apron's surface, the crumbs falling into folds like secret blessings. Fear and shame coexisted in the room, yet interspersed were moments of relief, quiet and fleeting. The apron became more than cloth. It was memory and comfort, a bridge between the dread they felt and the fragile humanity that persisted. Liesel's fingers traced its hem, while Johanna sucked her thumb, trusting the fabric as much as her mother. Each woman found her own rhythm of survival, whispered prayers mingling with the scent of wet straw and rain-slicked earth. And yet, even in this fragile reprieve, a subtle tension remained, a sense that the day was far from over, and that the apron would continue to bear witness to the moments both terrifying and tender, shaping their endurance with quiet insistence. March 3rd, 1945, noon. The rain had finally ceased, leaving the air crisp and carrying the sharp scent of wet stone and charred timbers from nearby ruins. Liesel Bauer adjusted Johanna in her arms, the child's small body still shivering despite the thin wool coat. The linen apron rested across Liesel's lap, dampened by rain and the pressure of nervous hands. Hunger clawed at her stomach, gnawing with relentless insistence, but she hesitated, mindful of the other women around her. Across the floor, a wooden crate bore a loaf of bread, slightly damp from the moisture in the room, untouched, yet potent with promise. The women's eyes flicked to it constantly, calculating risk, weighing fear against need. Liesel's fingers brushed the apron, as if the fabric itself might offer guidance. She saw Frau Müller, frail and pale, her hands trembling visibly as she reached forward, a quiet determination in her gaze. Liesel followed suit, lifting small pieces of the loaf and laying them gently on the apron, careful not to crush or soil the bread. Johanna watched with wide eyes, her small hand brushing against the crumbs, as if learning the delicate art of survival. Around them, whispers rippled through the shelter. Other women began to reach as well, each motion deliberate, slow, a silent negotiation of courage and etiquette. A young soldier, Private Daniels, barely more than 20, stood nearby, his rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. His gaze lingered, unreadable, but he made no move to intervene. That inaction spoke volumes. Relief coursed through the women like a warm current, mingled with the tension of knowing that such peace was temporary. Liesel felt the apron's texture beneath her fingers, absorbing the crumbs, the warmth of hesitant hands, the quiet trust forming in small, tangible ways. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The bread was more than sustenance. It was affirmation that decency could survive even in chaos. Liesel broke another piece, placing it carefully for Johanna, who accepted it with a small, grateful nod. Each fragment, each cautious act, was a declaration. Humanity persisted. The apron absorbed these tiny mercies, collecting them in folds, imprinting them like invisible ink across its linen surface. The women's murmurs mingled with the distant sounds of the town outside, debris shifting as the wind passed through broken walls. Liesel noticed how the apron carried not only crumbs but the weight of quiet courage, the kind that built slowly, imperceptibly, until it became tangible. She pressed a hand to Johanna's shoulder, feeling the child's tension ease slightly. But this was not the moment they would remember forever. It was a beginning, subtle, fragile, but profound, the first hint that mercy, like bread, could be shared without words, and that the apron would hold witness to each small, vital act of grace. March 3rd, 1945, mid-afternoon. The sun cut through the dispersing clouds in jagged streaks, casting uneven light across the makeshift shelter. The wooden floorboards creaked under the shifting weight of women settling on benches, heads bowed, voices subdued to whispers, each sound swallowed by the thick walls. Liesel adjusted the apron around Johanna once more, the fabric now dotted with crumbs, carrying the tangible residue of shared bread. Every fold, every damp spot, told a story of survival, fear, and cautious trust. Outside, distant shouts and the occasional crackle of gunfire reminded the women that the war was never far. Inside, tiny gestures became monumental. A young American soldier, Corporal Reynolds, hesitated before placing a threadbare blanket over Liesel's shoulders, his eyes flickering briefly to hers with a trace of apology, as if recognizing the injustice surrounding them. Johanna clutched the apron, drawing strength from its worn fibers. Liesel wrapped it around the child more tightly, feeling a warmth that was both literal and emotional. Hands passed tin cups of water. Bread fragments were divided with meticulous care, and the women communicated silently through glances and gentle nods. Each act, however small, carried immense weight, a quiet assertion of humanity in a place dominated by uncertainty and exhaustion. The apron absorbed it all, the warmth of hands pressed together, the brief smiles exchanged, the careful lifting of crumbs for those weaker or slower. Liesel felt a subtle shift within her, a fragile sense that even amid fear, gentleness could persist. Hans, the young cook, moved among them, distributing rations with deliberate care, his eyes scanning faces for signs of need. Liesel noted the effort in his movements, the careful balance of authority and empathy. Tiny moments, a hand brushing hair from a sweat-soaked forehead, a soft whisper to steady nerves, a shared glance over a child's sleeping face, compounded quietly into relief. The apron, soaked now with rain, crumbs, and small droplets of water, had become more than a piece of cloth. It was a repository of courage, a silent testament to resilience. The women remained still, yet tension lingered like a faint, unbroken hum. The quiet acts, repeated in rhythm, formed a fragile lattice of trust. Liesel held Johanna close, pressing the apron against her cheek, inhaling the faint scent of linen, sweat, and rain. She realized, almost silently, that the apron had shifted from a protective object to a conduit of human connection. The real shock came later, she sensed, beyond this room, beyond this afternoon. For now, every small gesture, every crumb placed with care, every blanket laid gently, was a victory, a claim to humanity that would ripple far beyond the shelter walls. March 3rd, 1945, late afternoon. Rain began again, tapping relentlessly against the shelter's thin wooden roof, streaking the windows and dripping from rafters in uneven rivulets. The air smelled damp and earthy, mingled with faint smoke from distant fires outside Mainz. Liesel Bauer pressed the linen apron to her face, inhaling the faint scent of her mother's perfume still clinging to the fabric, now damp with rain and remnants of earlier bread. Johanna's small hand clutched a corner of the apron tightly, seeking reassurance from its familiar texture. The child's eyes were wide, reflecting both exhaustion and the strange comfort that the apron had become. The women shifted uneasily as a soldier entered carrying a small tray of tin cups filled with warm tea. His boots squeaked on the wet floorboards. A soft, hesitant smile crossed his face as he moved through the rows of seated women. Liesel hesitated, watching the cups carefully, then lifted one and placed it on the apron before bringing it to her lips. The liquid was thin and warm, but it carried a sensation of security she had not felt in weeks. Around her, other women accepted their cups with tentative hands, the fragile warmth spreading through the room like sunlight breaking a cloudy sky. Tears slid quietly down faces, unbidden yet unpunished. A whisper here, a soft sigh there, and the shelter hummed with a muted, collective release. The apron absorbed the subtle tremors of emotion, the tension, the faint shivering from cold and fear, and the quiet joy of something simple yet profound. Liesel watched Johanna sip slowly, pressing the fabric against her mouth as if drawing courage from it. Each small gesture of care, tea poured, crumbs shared, hands resting briefly on shoulders, reinforced a web of trust that was forming silently among the women. A faint rustle of wet coats, the gentle clink of tin cups, and the occasional murmur filled the room. Even the soldier who had delivered the tea lingered for a moment, eyes scanning faces, a silent acknowledgement of the delicate human balance maintained within these walls. Liesel felt the apron's weight differently now, heavier, imbued with memory, yet lighter in spirit, carrying not just protection, but the proof that mercy, however small, could survive in a war-torn world. The women whispered quietly to each other, not the soldiers, their voices threading a soft chorus of gratitude, disbelief, and mutual recognition. Liesel pressed her face again to the apron, feeling the damp fibers against her skin, imagining her mother's hands smoothing the fabric in another, safer life. The moment was fleeting, delicate, and intensely human. The line between fear and relief had blurred, and Liesel sensed that the apron would remain a vessel for this day's revelations far beyond the shelter walls, holding memory, protection, and the fragile bloom of trust. Chapter 6. The Long Shadow. March 3rd, 1945, evening. The women were moved to a secondary shelter, smaller and quieter, its walls stripped bare of straw, more like a storeroom than a refuge. Rain still clung to broken windows and dripping rafters, soaking the floorboards in a shallow, cold puddle that reflected dim candlelight. Liesel wrapped the linen apron carefully around Johanna, now heavy with dampness, crumbs, and faint traces of tea. The fabric had absorbed the day's tension, the quiet acts of survival, the fragile gestures of kindness that had stitched moments of humanity into their afternoon. The soldiers withdrew to their posts outside, leaving the women in a curious hush, the kind that feels like domestic peace, yet carries the weight of uncertainty. Liesel adjusted the folds around Johanna, pressing the child close, feeling the faint warmth of her small body seep through the saturated linen. Around her, the other women arranged themselves quietly, some leaning against walls, others clasping hands together, all carrying a subtle tension beneath a veneer of calm. The apron, once simply a gift from her mother, had transformed into a protective shield, a repository of fear and courage alike, and a silent testament to the resilience and dignity of those who had survived the march, the waiting, the hunger, and the small mercies of the day. Liesel's fingers traced the worn edges, frayed threads catching briefly on her nails. Each crease, each smudge, told a story of trembling hands, whispered words, shared sustenance, and brief yet profound moments of connection. Johanna's eyes closed against her mother's chest, the apron cradling her like a talisman. Liesel realized the depth of its presence. It was no longer just fabric, but a vessel of history, memory, and human endurance. A faint murmur passed through the shelter as women adjusted their positions, the weight of exhaustion and relief mingling in the air. Liesel pressed her cheek once more to the apron, inhaling the mix of rain, bread, and quiet courage. She knew they would carry its memory with them, tucked into corners of their minds and hearts, as fragments or as a whole. The long shadow of the day would stretch into decades, marking the endurance of trust, mercy, and human dignity amid chaos. Outside, rain continued to fall softly, as if to seal the day's events into the world, leaving the women to rest under the gentle, encompassing watch of the apron, a silent guardian of all they had survived. Spring, 1985, Mainz, Germany. Liesel Bauer, now 68, moved slowly up the narrow attic stairs, each creak of wood echoing in the quiet house. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the delicate weight of memory pressing against her. At the far end of the attic, beneath a dusty beam, she knelt and opened a small, worn box. Inside lay the linen apron, yellowed with age yet intact, folded carefully, as if it had been waiting for this precise moment. Johanna, now 44, watched in silence, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. She had learned over decades to let her mother approach these relics on her own terms, knowing each artifact carried both history and feeling too heavy for words. The apron smelled faintly of time, a trace of rain, a hint of bread, and a whisper of her mother's perfume still embedded in its fibers. Liesel lifted it gently, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers, worn and frayed yet resilient, each thread a testament to survival. Johanna reached out, placing her hand atop her mother's, fingers brushing against the linen, connecting two generations with a silent, tactile bond. The attic seemed suspended in time, filled with the faint dust motes that caught sunlight streaming through the small, angled window. Memories flooded Liesel. March 3rd, 1945, the drizzling march, the damp shelters, the careful distribution of bread, and the small gestures of mercy that had stitched the women's lives together. She recalled the soldiers' quiet hesitations, the weight of fear, and the fragile courage of her fellow women. The apron had been there through it all, absorbing tension, relief, and acts of human kindness. It had been a shield, a witness, and a vessel for the stories that could not be spoken aloud. Johanna leaned closer, inhaling faintly, as if trying to draw the past into the present through the fabric. Together they unfolded the apron and held it between them, feeling its weight and texture, aware of the quiet endurance it represented. Tears slid down their cheeks, unbidden yet unashamed, mixing grief, gratitude, and wonder. Liesel whispered softly, almost to herself, "Some things endure because we refuse to forget them." The apron rested between them, a bridge across decades, linking memory to present, fear to courage, and sorrow to the quiet resilience of humanity. It was proof that small acts, crumbs of bread, shared warmth, the refusal to look away, could echo through lifetimes. Liesel and Johanna sat together, letting the silence of the attic hold them, feeling the fabric carry the day's events across time. It was a testament to endurance, mercy, and connection. Some things last not because they are grand, but because we remember them carefully. Hold on to what matters, for the smallest acts of courage ripple further than we can ever see.